Hey all, and welcome back to another episode of There's Danger Here. I'm Leilani, and today we're going to go to another case down under. So let's go back to Australia. On February 25th, 1931, Eric Edgar Cooke was born in Perth, Australia. His parents were Vivian Thomas Cooke and Christine Cooke, who married due to an untimely pregnancy of Christine. Edgar had two younger sisters. He was born with a cleft lip and palate. At 3 months old, he underwent his first corrective surgery to attempt to repair the lip and palate. At 3.5, he needed a second surgery to complete this correction. Still, as a result, his speech was affected, and because of that, Eric often mumbled, making it even harder to understand him. Vivian was a violent alcoholic who abused his wife and Eric. All sources I could find indicate Vivian was angry at Eric for causing a marriage, and when he came out with a cleft lip, he deemed him pretty much worthless. Christine, for her part, would often sleep at the hotel she worked at in order just to get away, leaving her children behind. When she was home, Eric would attempt to shield her from beatings, taking it all on himself. What started as fists graduated to belts and sticks. On multiple occasions, Eric even needed to be hospitalized for his injuries. So, we're off to just a fantastic start to this man's life. During his school years, Eric was great at many hands-on projects and skilled at retentive memory. Still, kids tend to suck, and because of the scar on his face and his mumbled speech, of course he was bullied relentlessly by his peer group. At home, he avoided abuse by wandering the streets at night. In order to attempt to fit in, he did things that were not socially acceptable. At 6, he attempted to steal money from the purse of his teacher, and when he was caught, he was expelled for it. This was the start of his school hopping adventures. In all, he was enrolled in 5 primary schools, all after behavior issues. At 14, he became a member of the Junior Surf Life Saving Club in Scarborough. Still, his antics didn't stop, and he stole a watch. Once caught, he was expelled from this club as well. Also at 14, he decided he was done with school and quit, entering the workforce instead. He started first by working as a delivery boy for the Central Provision stores. At 17, he became a peeping Tom, in addition to a snowdropper. A snowdropper is a person that steals women's underwear from the clothesline. This escalated to breaking and entering and stealing items from houses. After being rejected from joining a choir at church, he responded by burning the church down, for which, of course, he was caught, convicted of arson, and he even spent 18 months in prison. Then, when he turned 18, a local minister, the Reverend George Jenkins, took Eric in. He attempted to rehabilitate him. He was brought into the Young Methodists of South Perth Methodist Church and finally found his place among peers. From there, he began attending the Nedlands Methodist Church and did well up until he began visiting parishioners in their homes. See, this church held a large class of wealthier people, and while Eric visited them, he started stealing items from their homes too. It didn't take long before he wasn't welcome anymore. He continued down the track of violence, damaging property to those he believed wronged him, including B&Es, tearing up furniture, bedding, and clothing, stealing money and food. And one time, he put a goldfish in a pot of water on the stove and turned it on before simply leaving. Eric attempted to join the permanent military forces and even did well for 3 months. But his previous convictions came to light, and he was subsequently discharged. At 21, in 1952, he traveled to Melbourne and joined there. He made it an additional 3.5 months before once again he was discovered and discharged. He learned skills with guns during his 6.5 months in the military, however. In 1953, Eric left fingerprints during a burglary. He was arrested, but given a fine and a good behavior bond. That same year, he met Sarah Levine, who went by Sally, at the West Perth Metropolitan Markets while working as a truck driver. Sally was an 18-year-old waitress at the time. The two began dating, and by October, they were married, and Sally was pregnant. In total, the couple would have 7 children together. Sally knew parts of Eric's past, including some of his convictions, but believed they were all related to theft, and found it a common offense for people of their standing to commit in order to simply survive. Throughout the years of his criminal activity, Eric reported that he would often steal a car, ride around, and then return it to the site that he stole it from. Many times, the owners weren't even aware that the car was stolen. And at the time, Perth had a low rate of crime, so owners often left their keys in the ignition of the vehicle when they were gone. In 1955, he did steal a car and was caught, and for this, went to prison, being sentenced for 2 years, but was released early in December of 1956. There, guards and police reported he was a model prisoner, always polite and well-groomed. At this time, Eric became increasingly violent to Sally and would leave for days at a time. Eric continued with breaking and entering and theft at this time. Any extra cash on hand was used on other women. On September 12th, 1958, Eric stole a car and ran over 26-year-old Nell Schneider as she rode home on a bicycle. She suffered a head injury but survived the attack. She did develop epilepsy, and as a result of her injuries and later in her life, lost her ability to walk or stand. On November 25th, 1958, Eric broke into the house of Molly McLeod and attacked her while she was in bed, simply sleeping. On December 27th, 1958, Eric stole another car and hit Kathy Bellis, then drove off. She too, luckily survived. On August 8th, 1959, Eric broke into the house of Alex Donkin, assaulting her in bed. She survived. On January 30th, 1959, Eric broke into the house of Brina Berkman, or Patricia. In the house, he went to the kitchen and pulled out a kitchen knife, then entered Patricia's bedroom and stabbed her to death. In 1959, Eric came home with scratches all over his face, and when Sally asked what happened, Eric claimed it was their disabled son Michael who had caused the injuries. On December 20th, 1959, Eric broke into the house of Gillian Brewer in Coatslow. He had a pair of scissors and a tomahawk when he entered Gillian's room. Again, he stabbed her, but then he continued to mutilate her body. When he was finished, he took lemonade from the house and drank it outside, before returning back to her body to continue cutting on her. On April 9th, 1960, Eric drove a stolen vehicle into 19-year-old Glennis Peak as she walked home after a dance. As he approached her, he sped up, and Glennis moved off to the side of the road, only to see the car swerve at her. Glennis was able to stand after being hit and ran through a timber yard to her home. Eric reported that he didn't know who he hit at first because it was dark, but it turns out Eric actually knew her. He had given her rides home multiple times, and Glennis even knew about his son, Michael. She ended up surviving with minor bruises and cuts. On May 13th, 1960, Jill Connell was the next to be hit by a stolen vehicle with Eric behind the wheel. On May 20th, 1960, Maureen Rogers, Georgina Pittman, and Teresa Zagame were riding in Vespas. Again, they were struck with a vehicle that immediately took off after the attack. Luckily, all three women survived. On March 3rd, 1962, Eric broke into the house of Anne Melvin. He began strangling her when she woke up. Eric then sexually assaulted her and fled, leaving her battered, but she too was alive. On December 29th, 1962, Eric broke into 25-year-old Peggy Flory's house. She was sexually assaulted and beaten in the face. She screamed, and her parents, who also lived in the house, woke up. They came to her aid. As her parents woke once again, Eric fled. On January 26, 1963, 29-year-old Brian Ware was sleeping in an open veranda door. From the outside of the house, Eric took out a gun, aimed, and shot him in the head. Brian was in a coma for 6 months after the shooting. When he awoke, he was paralyzed on one side of his body, unable to speak, blind in one eye, and deaf in one ear. He had to use a wheelchair and needed caregiver support around the clock. Brian survived until September 19th, 1965, when one of the bullet fragments shifted in his brain, resulting in a seizure and ultimately death. The same night, Eric knocked on the door of 55-year-old George Walmsley. George answered, but Eric had backed into the shadows. From there, he shot George in the head. His wife and daughter heard the shot and ran to the front, seeing George, who fell where he was hit. He died within minutes of the shot. Still the same night, 19-year-old John Sturkey slept on the veranda of a boarding house that he lived at. As Eric was walking by, he simply shot John in the head. His roommate heard him making noises after the shot and called for help, but he didn't make it to the hospital alive either. The last murder of this night was 17-year-old Rosemary Anderson, who was walking down the road that night after arguing with her boyfriend. By this time, Eric had stolen a car, which he of course used to run her down. Rosemary suffered from head and abdominal injuries, lacerations and abrasions across her body. Her boyfriend had gone after her. He was the one who found her on the road and brought her to the hospital. But unfortunately, like I said, Rosemary didn't survive the operating table. Two survivors, Nicholas August and Rowena Reeves, a couple involved in an affair, were drinking in Nicholas's car when he noticed someone watching them from the shadows. He threw a bottle at the man and told him, "Leave." In response, Eric raised a rifle and began shooting. Nicholas was hit once in the back of the neck. The bullet went through his neck, then through Rowena's wrist. Nicholas got the car in drive and took off, saving both of them. On February 15th, 1963, Eric broke into the house of 24-year-old Lucy Madrill. As he entered, he knocked over a picture frame, which woke Lucy from her sleep. She fought Eric. Eric strangled her with his hands until she was unconscious, then grabbed a cord from a lamp beside the bed and finished strangling her. After this, he raped her and dragged her into the neighbor's lawn. There, he took an empty whiskey bottle and again raped her with that. On June 15, 1963, Eric broke into the flat of Carmel Reed, breaking into a window and waking Carmel in the process. He stabbed her with her own umbrella in the chest and punched her repeatedly. The two began struggling, and a neighbor heard the commotion, coming to Carmel's aid. Eric fled, and Carmel survived. On August 10th, 1963, Eric broke into the house of the Dodd family. Babysitter 18-year-old Shirley MacLeod was asleep on the couch. Eric shot her in the head where she slept, after which Eric tossed the rifle, which turned out to be stolen. Of course, he left it in some bushes. An elderly couple noticed it and called the police. Police matched the ballistics to Shirley. They also decided it was very likely their killer would come back for said rifle. So they set up a sting, placing a similar rifle in the spot and monitoring it. For 17 days they waited. Then, on September 1st, a man came and tried to retrieve it. Police surrounded him, and it turned out to be Eric. They arrested him immediately. Among the items in his possession were women's gloves and a pair of women's underwear in his pocket. Prior to his arrest, according to All That's Interesting, quote, police were working hard to snare the man who'd been terrorizing Perth. During their investigation, more than 30,000 males aged over 12 were fingerprinted, and more than 60,000 .22 rifles, the type Cooke used in some of his murders, were located and test-fired, end quote. This was likely a result of the multiple shootings in one day. Prior to that, the randomness of the attacks would likely have kept police from putting together the idea that a serial attacker was in their midst. Media had deemed the person who was killing people the night caller. The same day as the arrest, Eric confessed to the killing of Shirley MacLeod. But at the time, he didn't say anything else. Police, however, believed he may be responsible for the shootings and murders on January 26, and as such, police decided to bring in one of the officers that knew him from his previous arrests, one that had a good rapport with him. Detective Baker was chosen, and 3 days later brought him out to lunch at a local hotel. There, Baker told him plainly that he would likely hang for the killing of Shirley, and so he should really just confess to any other crimes that he committed. Eric reportedly cried out, then took a pen from Baker's pocket, something he had done during the earlier years when he confessed to lesser crimes he routinely committed. At the station, Eric confessed to 8 murders, 14 attempted murders, and more than 250 burglaries throughout Perth. He could give the police any detail of the crime, no matter how small. When they finally got around to asking him why he did it, he responded that he just wanted to hurt people. On November 25th, 1963, Eric was brought before Justice Virtue in the Supreme Court of Western Australia, where his defense lawyer entered a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity, claiming Eric was schizophrenic that suffered from violent abuse and likely head injuries, preventing him from understanding right and wrong. The judge therefore had Eric assessed for mental illnesses. Dr. Ellis met with Eric and reported that Eric was not schizophrenic, nor did he have any other mental illness. With that, Eric went to trial, which lasted a mere 3 days. For this, he was found guilty of murder and sentenced to death by hanging. Eric opted not to appeal his sentence after thanking Justice Virtue. His execution date was scheduled for October 1964, spending 333 days at the Fremantle prison before that day. During that time, he remained a model prisoner. On October 26, 1964, Eric was awoken from his cell and taken to the waiting cell. 4 guards escorted him to the shower from there, and then he was given clothes for his execution. Reverend Jenkins performed Eric's last rites, and he remained along with the guards and officials required to be present for the execution. No family or friends were there for the hanging. At 8 a.m., a white hood was placed over his head, and the 4 guards walked him to the gallows. Once his feet were on the trap door, a noose was placed around his neck. Secured, and then the trap door was released. And with that, Eric was the 154th person to be hanged. He was also the last to be hanged in Western Australia. After his death, Sally and the children remained in Perth. Other than an incident where a brick was thrown through their window, they received support from their friends and family. After all, they were victims in their own right. Now I know this is a rather short one, but it is gruesome, and he did have a reign of terror over Perth that lasted for years if you include the burglaries. But with that, that's the story of Eric Edgar Cooke, Perth's night caller. To all those out there listening, be careful. It really is a dangerous world we live in.